Welcome back, everyone, to Echoes of Ihsan. Today, we're embarking on another deep dive. This time is the fascinating world of oaths and vows in Islam.
It really is a universal human struggle, isn't it? Trying to keep our word even when life takes those unexpected turns.
Absolutely. I mean, we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
Whether it was a childhood pinky promise or those New Year's resolutions, we start with the best intentions, but sometimes things just don't go as planned.
Exactly. So how does Islam navigate that delicate balance between, staying true to our word and also navigating the ever-changing realities of life?
Right, because it's not always black and white, is it?
It isn't. And that's where I think the beauty of Islamic teachings really shines through. It's not about rigid adherence, but about acknowledging that we're human and things happen. And there's a whole framework for approaching those situations with wisdom and compassion.
That makes sense. Can you maybe give us an example of what you mean?
Sure, so let's take Abu Bakr, the first caliph of Islam, as an example. He was known for his unwavering commitment to oaths, like he'd never break one, ever. However, this changed when the concept of expiation was revealed.
Ah, expiation. That's a term we'll be hearing a lot in this deep dive. Can you explain it for our listeners who might not be familiar with it?
Of course, expiation, or kafara in Arabic, basically means making amends for a broken oath. It's recognizing that we're not perfect. And sometimes, despite our best intentions, we might end up breaking a vow.
It acknowledges the human element, right, that we
Yeah.
make mistakes.
Exactly. And it offers a path for redemption. Instead of being condemned for breaking an oath, we're encouraged to make things right.
So it's not just about saying, "Eeps, sorry,"
Uh-huh.
but taking actual steps to make amends.
Exactly. So it's very proactive. It emphasizes accountability, like aligning our actions with our intentions.
So what does this expiation actually look like? I mean, what are some of the ways people make amends?
Well, it depends on the nature of the broken oath. It could be things like fasting for a certain period, feeding the poor, or in earlier times, even freeing a slave.
So doing some good deeds to kind of counterbalance the broken commitment.
Yeah, that's the idea. It's about restoring that balance and seeking Allah's forgiveness.
Right, because ultimately it's about recognizing that we're not infallible and there's mercy and forgiveness in Islam.
Absolutely. Now, there's another interesting hadith that comes to mind here. The one that advises against actively seeking leadership roles, but promises divine help for those who are given authority without asking.
That's a good point, because how does that tie into our conversation about oaths?
It's all about the weight of responsibility that comes with leadership in Islam.
Yeah.
It's not about power or status. It's a heavy burden of accountability before Allah.
So accepting that role, even if you didn't go after it, becomes a kind of oath in itself, like a commitment to serve the community.
You got it. It highlights how commitments can go beyond those explicitly stated oaths or vows. It's about fulfilling the responsibilities we take on, even if they're not formally declared.
So our actions and the roles we take on also carry a kind of implicit commitment.
Absolutely. And it broadens our understanding of what an oath can be. It can be a spoken vow, but it can also be about upholding the trust placed in you.
That's fascinating. Now, I have to ask about a specific story from Sahih Bukhari. It's the one about Abu Musa and the Ash'arian tribe, who asked the Prophet for mounts. He initially swore he wouldn't provide them because he had none at the time. But later, some camels arrived and he did provide them with mounts. How do we make sense of that? It seems like a contradiction.
But it's not a contradiction. It's a perfect illustration of the principle of prioritizing the greater good. In this case, fulfilling the needs of the Ash'arian outweighed the literal adherence to the earlier oath.
So it's about adapting to this situation while upholding higher ethical principles.
Exactly. But what's important is that the prophet still made expiation for his initial oath, even though he ultimately acted in a way that served the greater good. It shows that the principle of accountability remains crucial.
So it's about recognizing that even when we need to adapt our commitments for a higher purpose, making amends is still important.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful balance, isn't it?
It really is. Now let's shift gears a bit. There are several hadiths that say fulfilling an oath that would harm one's family is a greater sin than breaking it and making expiation. This puts family welfare above strict adherence to oaths, right?
Absolutely. It highlights the paramount importance of family in Islam. It's about compassion and prioritizing the well-being of loved ones.
So if someone's oath could jeopardize their family, they're actually encouraged to break it and make amends.
That's right. It's recognizing that oaths, while important, are not absolute. They need to be guided by wisdom and compassion.
That makes a lot of sense. Life is full of these complex situations, and applying principles often requires careful consideration.
I completely agree. Islamic teachings offer this beautiful balance of upholding commitments while also acknowledging the complexity of life and prioritizing compassion. Now, getting back to Sahih al-Bukhari, we see the Prophet Muhammad using oaths in many different situations. Let's dive into some of these to understand how they were used back then.
Yes, let's explore those examples.
For instance, there's the Hadith, where the Prophet swears to defend the leadership of Usama bin Zayd. He was a young man appointed to lead an army, and there was criticism because of his age. The Prophet's oath affirmed Usama's capabilities, countering those societal prejudices.
It was a powerful way to show trust and counter those biases.
Exactly. It also demonstrated that merit and competence are what matters in Islamic leadership.
So the oath had that practical purpose of supporting Usama, but also this broader message about leadership.
Exactly. And were there any specific phrases the Prophet used when taking oaths?
Yeah. I was curious about that too. Like, were there any common ones that stand out?
Oh, absolutely. One that comes up often is "No, by him who turns the hearts."
That's a powerful image. It points to Allah's control over our deepest emotions.
Exactly. It adds this weight and depth to the oath, connecting it to the divine. And then there are those oaths in Sahih al-Bukhari that sound almost like prophecies. Those predicting the fall of empires like the Byzantine and Persian empires?
Those are interesting because they seem to go beyond the immediate situation.
They do. They hint at the transient nature of worldly power and the eventual triumph of Islam. Plus, they show how treasures would be used for the cause of Allah.
It's like they operate on multiple levels, addressing the present, but also pointing to this grander historical narrative.
Precisely. Individual events and historical shifts are all interconnected within this larger divine plan. There's also that very poignant oath where the Prophet says, "O followers of Muhammad, by Allah, if you knew what I know, you would weep much and laugh little."
It's a stark reminder about the afterlife, isn't it? That this worldly life is fleeting.
Absolutely. It encourages us to prioritize actions that benefit us in the hereafter.
To shift our perspective, to look beyond the immediate and focus on our ultimate destination.
Exactly. And then there's that oath about the importance of loving the Prophet more than oneself for complete faith.
Right. It emphasizes his central role in Islam.
It's about prioritizing his guidance, aligning your will with his example, and seeking to emulate him. It's pretty profound.
It is. And in Sahih al-Bukhari, we also see oath being used in legal proceedings. Like a man asks the Prophet to judge a dispute according to Allah's laws, and the Prophet takes an oath before making his judgment.
That shows how important oaths were in ensuring fairness and justice, especially when evidence was lacking.
So they really served multiple purposes back then, from invoking divine authority to emphasizing sincerity to making legal pronouncements.
They did. Oaths weren't just words. They had real spiritual and social weight, reflecting the connection between faith, ethics, and social conduct. But before we wrap up this part of our discussion, there's another crucial aspect to mention: the prohibition against swearing by anything other than Allah.
Right. Several hadiths emphasize this, don't they?
They do. It underscores the absolute singularity of divine authority in Islam. Swearing by anything else is seen as associating partners with Allah, which is a major sin.
It's about purifying our intentions and ensuring our actions align with the belief in the oneness of God.
Exactly. And with that, I think we've covered a lot of ground in understanding the concept of oaths in Islam.
We've discussed expiation, seen how the Prophet used oaths, and touched upon some deep spiritual and ethical implications.
And this is just the beginning. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve deeper into the communal aspects of oaths, prioritizing family well-being, and explore some more fascinating cases. Stay tuned. Picking up from our last discussion about the individual aspects of oaths, let's shift our focus now to the communal aspect of oaths in Islam.
You mean how oaths are not just between you and Allah, but also affect the whole community?
Exactly. It's about that collective responsibility to help each other uphold those righteous commitments. There's this hadith where the Prophet explicitly tells Muslims to help others fulfill their oaths.
It's like that safety net you were talking about earlier, where everyone supports each other to do the right thing.
Exactly. It's about strengthening those bonds through shared commitment. But what about when life throws you a curveball? Things don't go as planned. How do we deal with loss or setbacks when it's hard to keep that oath?
That's a really good question.
Well, Islam teaches us to face those tough moments with resilience and grace. Remember that hadith about the Prophet's daughter and her dying child?
The one where she begs him to come see her, even swearing he should be there, it's so heartbreaking.
It is. But despite the urgency, the Prophet's first response was to send his condolences and remind her that everything belongs to Allah, to be patient and hope for Allah's reward.
It's a tough lesson, but it's about accepting Allah's will even when it hurts.
Right. It's about finding comfort in surrender and trusting in his wisdom. But remember, the Prophet did eventually visit his daughter.
Yeah, when she sent for him again, emphasizing her distress.
Exactly. He went and comforted her. It's a beautiful balance between accepting Allah's will and offering human compassion and support.
It's about being there for each other during tough times.
Islam isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about acknowledging our humanity while remaining grounded in our faith. Now, thinking about the people of paradise and hellfire, there's a big difference in how they're described in Sahih Bukhari, right?
There is. And it extends the way they handle oaths, doesn't it?
Yes, the people of paradise are the ones who are truthful, humble, and always fulfill their promises. Their oaths are a reflection of their inner purity.
They're in tune with those divine principles.
Right. And those destined for hellfire are described as arrogant, deceitful, oath breakers. They don't care about the consequences.
Like oaths are a measure of our character.
Exactly. They reflect whether we're driven by self-interest or a higher purpose.
And that idea of oaths being tied to character also comes up when we talk about those hadiths that predict the decline of future generations.
You mean those warnings about the decline of morals?
Right. Dishonesty, especially regarding oaths, is mentioned as a key sign. People taking oaths lightly, breaking them without a second thought.
That's a scary thought, because when oaths lose their value, trust disappears and everything starts to fall apart.
It's like society itself starts to decay.
It does. So upholding that truthfulness and integrity, especially when it comes to oaths, is vital to a healthy society. And the consequences of breaking oaths, especially when you harm someone or take their property unjustly, those are incredibly serious in Islam.
Right. It goes beyond just breaking a casual promise. It's a betrayal of trust.
Exactly. And there's a hadith where the Prophet specifically warns that whoever swears falsely to take a Muslim's property will face Allah's wrath.
It's a powerful warning.
It is. It reminds us that our actions have both earthly and divine consequences. We're accountable to Allah for everything.
So while Islam emphasizes keeping oaths, there are also limits. They shouldn't be used to hurt people or violate Islamic principles.
You're absolutely right. Remember the hadith about the man who vowed to torture himself as part of his religious practice?
Torture himself. What did that even involve?
Back then, some people thought extreme acts of self-denial brought them closer to Allah. They would do things like excessive fasting, standing in the scorching sun without any shade, even hurting themselves physically.
It sounds so extreme.
The Prophet rejected those extremes outright. He emphasized that true piety isn't about harming yourself. Islam promotes moderation and balance.
So even if you made a vow to do something like that, he would advise against it.
Of course, it goes against the very essence of preserving life.
It's about finding that middle ground where you uphold your commitments without compromising your well-being.
Exactly. And there are other examples. Remember Abu Israel, who vowed to constantly stand, not speak, and avoid shade.
What happened with him?
The Prophet told him to speak and sit when he needed to seek shade from the sun. Fulfilling vows is important, but not to the point of self-destruction.
Right, it shouldn't come at the cost of your health.
Another example is that you can't fast on the 2 Eid days, even if you vowed to fast regularly.
So even a personal commitment to fast takes a back seat to those special celebrations.
Exactly. It's about finding that harmony between individual piety and communal joy. These examples really highlight the balance and nuanced approach within Islamic teachings.
They do. This deep dive has been so eye-opening. We've covered so much ground on the topic of oaths.
We have, from expiation and its role in balancing commitment with flexibility to how social responsibility and family well-being are so intertwined with oaths.
It's amazing how Islam provides this framework for navigating those complex situations.
It's about approaching your commitments with sincerity, accountability, and compassion, always being mindful of the consequences.
This has given me so much to think about.
And there's still more. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore some more fascinating cases and stories that will really highlight the ethical considerations around oaths in Islam. Get ready for some thought-provoking insights.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the world of oaths and vows in Islam, I'm really looking forward to delving into some more of those nuanced cases from Sahih Bukhari. You know, the ones that really challenge our understanding of these principles.
Oh, absolutely. Sahih Bukhari is full of those. There's one that always stands out to me, the story of Rifa bin Zaid and his slave, Midam.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. It took place during the Battle of Khaybar, right? A really significant event in early Islamic history.
Exactly. And Midam fought bravely. He was killed in action. Everyone thought he had achieved martyrdom.
And they congratulated Rifa, believing Midam had entered paradise.
Right. But there was a twist. After the battle, the prophet received a revelation.
That Midam had actually stolen from the war booty before it was divided.
Exactly. So even though he died fighting, his act of theft had serious consequences. It negated the rewards of martyrdom.
It really shows that our actions have consequences, both in this life and the next, no matter how things might appear on the surface.
Absolutely. This story goes beyond those surface judgments. True righteousness is about the purity of our intentions. It's about aligning our actions with those divine principles.
It's been an incredible journey exploring the world of oaths and vows in Islam. We've learned about expiation, the importance of family, the connection between oaths and social responsibility.
It's amazing how Islam provides that framework for navigating the complexities of commitments.
It really does. It's all about finding that balance, isn't it? Upholding those commitments while also being compassionate and adapting to changing circumstances.
Exactly. And always seeking to please Allah through our actions.
So as we wrap up, I'm left with this question. How can understanding the nuances of oaths and vows in Islam help us make better, more mindful commitments in our own lives?
That's the key takeaway, isn't it? I think the biggest lesson is the weight of our words. We need to approach our commitments with so much sincerity and thoughtfulness.
To be mindful of those oaths and promises, big or small, and really try our best to fulfill them.
Absolutely. And if something genuinely prevents us from keeping a commitment, we have expiation. That path to seeking forgiveness and making things right. It's a reminder that we can always realign ourselves and seek Allah's mercy.
And to remember that oaths should never be used to harm others or go against those ethical principles. Our commitment should always be about doing good for ourselves and for those around us.
Exactly. They should reflect our desire to live a life that's pleasing to Allah and benefits all of humanity.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of oaths and vows in Islam. We hope you continue reflecting on these concepts and find ways to apply those timeless principles in your own life.
May your commitments be guided by wisdom, compassion, and that sincere desire to walk the path of righteousness.
Until next time, may peace and blessings be upon you.